Welcome to the Mind Body Strength Nerds podcast with Dr. Scotty Butcher, a licensed physiotherapist with a PhD in physiology. This podcast is for people with mind-body, psychophysiologic, or neuroplastic conditions, and for the practitioners who help them. NERD stands for neuroplasticity and emotional recovery discussions and stories. Are you ready? Let's fucking go. What's up, nerds? Oh, I have a funny story to tell you. So I decided to come on and do a podcast about this because it is a really prime example of what to do and potentially not what not to do when something happens. And so this episode is going to be all about symptoms and what to do when something really bad or could be really bad happens. All right. So if you know anything about my story, what you know is that I've had lots of injuries. I've had lots of things go on in my life, and that's lots of sports. That's a little bit of clumsiness. It's a combination of a few things. So here's what happened. So I was coming down the stairs, and I'm not a spring chicken anymore, but I exercise, so I'm in pretty good shape, and I can catch myself when I jump and fall and all that kind of thing. Anyway, I tripped down the stairs, and it's I'll show the evidence. If you guys are watching on YouTube, I will show the evidence right here. So you'll be able to have a look at what exactly happened. But I fell down the stairs, and I obviously took a tumble, and this was something that could have been a lot worse than it was. So I have a history of, as I said, of injuries. I've injured my back. I've injured my shoulders. I have a known rotator cuff and labral tear in my left shoulder, labral tear in my right shoulder. I've got a spondylolisthesis. I've got a previous herniation that was in my L5-S1 that was associated with the spondylolisthesis. And if you don't know what all of those medical terminology means, it just basically means my MRI was fucked up. And this happens so often, right? Like I said, not a spring chicken anymore. So we know that all of these imaging findings are very common. So I'm in my early 50s, just to kind of put that out there. And people in their 50s have these findings and sometimes have no pain. And I've been able to go through the vast majority of the last few years without a lot of pain and discomfort. But I know that I've got these changes, these findings in my scans and that. So it's very real stuff. But here's what happened. So I took a fall, and, I just remember in slow motion kind of, my brain going through the, oh, do I try and catch myself? Do I put my hands out? Do I, try and hold on to the railing and all of that? And that, I mean, obviously I'm not making those conscious decisions. It's reactive, right? It's too quick for all that to happen. Apparently what I defaulted to is, okay, I'm just going to kind of roll with it and literally roll with it. So hit the ground and roll. And of course, as you saw, if you're watching on YouTube, you saw I hit the wall. And when I hit the wall, my shoulder hit fairly hard. I also rolled into it and landed on my hip. So with the hip hitting the ground and my shoulder hitting the wall, I immediately noticed pain. I noticed pain in my low back, and I noticed pain in my shoulder. So this is the point of this episode, is to really talk about what actually happens with that, and why I'm here right now saying, yep, okay, this is about 6 days later, and I have zero pain anymore. Whereas I'm going to contrast that with a similar story from a client, all things being anonymous. Obviously, I'm not going to provide any details, but a client with a similar history, similar story, and things went completely different for them. Now, just let me preface this to say that I understand everybody's different, and I understand that everybody's going to respond to things differently, and that's okay. That's totally fine. Part of what we do in this work is really provide the knowledge and the evidence about where pain comes from. And this isn't common knowledge. This isn't something that this other individual grew up with and just ignored and now is bucking the system or whatever. This is just really how a lot of injuries happen, and how a lot of people can spiral into the problems that happen with injuries and all of this stuff. So let's pause at the moment where I hit the ground and I notice pain. So that's a reactive process. That pain is my brain and my nervous system's interpretation of what went on. Now, it has history, right? Howard Schubiner talks a lot about predictive processing. And so what my brain is doing in that moment is going, oh, there's some jarring of the low back, there's jarring of the shoulder, and this pain comes on. What I then, me as the human, have the choice at that moment to say, okay, I'm either going to freak out about this, I'm going to be really mad, disappointed, I'm going to be worried about everything, or I'm going to choose a different path. Now, again, I'm not saying that everybody has the option to choose this path. Had I broken something at that moment, this would be a very different story. Right? This is why one of the things that what to do when you get symptoms is, if you're not sure, absolutely go to the doctor, get an x-ray, get an MRI. All of these things can be very important. But what we want to do is we want to put all of those things into some degree of context. So for me, the context was, well, am I gonna die? Is something actually massively hurt here? I looked at that and I just kind of moved my shoulder. Sure, there was some pain. I kind of got up, I moved my back. Yeah, there was a little bit of pain. And yeah, that pain was so familiar. That memory, that predictive processing made total sense why I felt pain in my shoulder and pain in my low back in the same way, the same type of pain that I felt when I was injured previously. So what at that point do? I take that inventory and I go, okay, I can actually move. All right. So I'm not actually broken here. And I found that, yeah, for the next day and couple days, I was a little bit sore. Right. But I just kept telling myself, okay, well, this is normal because I just fell down the damn stairs. And, luckily my wife was there and she saw it, and she saw, she saw what was going on. And we had a laugh about it after she knew that I was actually okay and hadn't broken anything and whatever. But okay, so what's the point of this? The point is that I have seen many, many, many clients, and I'm going to talk about one specifically that this went completely wrong and completely different. Okay. So I'm going to get to that in a minute. But what I want to say is, what do we typically do when we get some sort of incident like this, some sort of fall, some sort of problem, and symptoms start showing up? Okay. So people have two responses they typically do. They either push through and go, oh, it's fine. And, the pain gets worse and worse and worse, or they go into fix-it mode. They go into, oh my God, fear response, fix it mode. I've got to do something. I've just really hurt myself. And both of these responses are both fear responses. They both signal danger to the nervous system, and they keep the alarm bells going. These alarm bells that initially happened, that predictive processing, right? That predictive processing is the alarm, creates the alarm that says to my body, uh-oh, you've done something that is very familiar, and this could go very, very wrong. But there is a third option that most people really haven't been taught. Okay, let's give a little bit of a backstory here. Okay, and so the backstory for me is about some of my injuries and some of the past, and there's a reason I'm going into this. But What I'm going to start saying is, I was involved with a lot of sports as a kid and as an adolescent and a young adult. I had a lot of great coaches, a lot of really, really, really good coaches. I'm going to just mention one as an aside here because it's really how I created the name of my business, Mind Body Strength. Is this came back from when I was in grade 12 in high school. And I had a football coach who was also the gym teacher, and he was an amazing person, amazing coach, amazing really mentor for me at the time. Coached me football, coached a lot of different things. I was doing weight training a lot in high school, and I'll never forget this moment. This moment was I had come out of working out, and I changed and was getting ready to go back into classes. And I don't know if I was doing a lunch hour workout or whatever. And he was teaching, I think it was the grade 10s at the time, so a couple of years younger. And there were so I was starting to walk as he was talking to the students, and I didn't really notice anything, but there must have been a few people looking and just going, "Oh, who's that?" or whatever. And I just heard him say, "Oh, that's Scott Butcher," and so I went by Scott at that day instead of Scotty. But that's neither here nor there. But what he said is, yeah, he's he's strong. He's strong in mind and strong in body, and that phrase really, really stuck with me. And obviously, that's the name of the business. But it took really a lot of years for me to really understand what that means, what that strong in body and strong in mind actually means. It doesn't mean pushing through. But keep in mind, this was the early 90s that I was in high school, and strong meant strong. That meant pushing through. It meant strong in mind meant you're not going to let anything get to you. How wrong was that interpretation, though? Okay, so it took me years to figure all that out, but I eventually did. So that's sort of the preface here. Now I'm going to move into a new point in my time. This is a little bit later. I was actually in physio school, and so I again, some great coaches. I had two coaches that were part of my club rugby team, and we were doing some drills that day. I was in maybe second year physiotherapy at the time, and I had actually just stepped in a little hole and had a little tweak of my hamstring. Now, part of what the coaches said to me was absolutely true, but the comment really stuck with me. What happened was I tweaked my hamstring, and I basically said to them, "Oh, I just hurt myself. I think I pulled my hamstring. I need to sit out." And so I sat out of the drills, and I overheard them talking to each other, and they said, "What? I wonder what happened. He used to be so tough." Right. And then one of them responded saying, "Well, I guess a little bit of knowledge, just makes things worse," or something along those lines. Now, that comment, as even though there was some truth to that comment got wired in. And in fact, that hamstring injury, which really wasn't much of an injury at all, it wasn't something that set me out for weeks or weeks. I was literally out for maybe a couple days. It wasn't that bad, but I to this day, well, let's say in the last couple of years, it hasn't happened, but up until then, I still periodically, I felt some pain in that area. And so I really got to thinking, well, what does that have to do with? Why is that there? Because I didn't hurt myself. I really didn't. I didn't do anything that was going to be significant. I didn't do a massive tear at that time. But because I had been going through physio school, this is in the 90s, remember, physio was something where there was a lot of what we call nocebos going through the type of learning. So for an example, the way physiotherapy was at the time is that we, sort of find what's going on, we label it as something dangerous, and then we try and do something as to fix it. And that framing trains people to see their bodies as fragile. And that is my honest interpretation of the physiotherapy profession, particularly back in the 90s. Now, we've come a long way since that time. We don't look at bodies as fragile very much anymore, but a lot of the assessments we do are still kind of along that. But at the time, I thought, oh, pain equals damage. Now, that is the key thing. If you take anything from this episode or this podcast for that matter, pain does not equal damage. Symptoms of all kinds do not equal damage. And that is the key point here. But at that time, the hamstring issue, previous to physio school, I probably would have just pushed through. I probably would have just went, yeah, that's nothing. It's, what did I do? Well, I stepped in a hole. Yeah, I felt something, but yeah, it's okay. And I would have kept going. But there was a fear response that happened. That fear response was, oh, pain equals damage. I pulled my hamstring. I need to protect it. I need to sit out to protect it. And this is where that comment from the coaches came, and that stuck with me. So all of that history sort of framed a lot of the way I dealt with things and why I had chronic pain and chronic symptoms and chronic anxiety. A lot of that came from that nocebo effect, or that effect of having that fear cycle. Our bodies, our nervous systems, our brains learn. That is really what neuroplasticity is, and why we talk about neuroplasticity now is we talk about how comments like what my coaches said get wired in, and how that hamstring pain can continue when I'm doing something innocuous, something completely benign. And it's like, whoa, there's that pain again. That pain is going to be wired in and come up at different times, not indicating damage. It's indicating maybe something else, times of stress, times of transition, times of remembering something going on. There's all sorts of reasons why this happens. That is neuroplasticity. It's not tissue damage. That is a very, very important key point. All right. So let's go back to the fall now. So I had fallen, as you see. I had a history of lots of problems, right? I had, again, the MRIs and the scans and all of that. But the one big difference between all of the stuff that happened back in the day and this fall now is that I had done the work to understand what pain was and to understand how to look at an injury. Right? Most people don't have that advantage. I do look at that as an advantage. Not to say that the people that do get significant pain and problems, that they're doing something wrong. Again, this is what we are taught. We are taught that pain equals damage. We are taught protection. And all of that makes so much sense based on what we're feeling, because that's what we typically think. But the problem is that's not actually how it works. Right? Imaging shows structure on paper, but it doesn't show what's driving the symptoms, okay? These symptoms and this framework, it's important to understand that this has to apply to something that has kind of already been checked out or known. Now, if I had a new symptom, something very severe or changing from what it was before, I'm going to say first thing, and I will tell you absolutely, if you're unsure, go get it checked out, right? I'm not trying to say push through and, suffer through pain. This is not what we're talking about. If you broke your back, if I broke my shoulder, if there was something major going on, go to the doctor, get an x-ray, get the testing, and get it managed appropriately. That is absolutely crucial. But there's a difference here when we talk about some of these old symptoms that keep coming back, these old symptoms that bring up these memories, okay? So let me talk about this other client now. This client that I had, similar. This was a workplace injury. That is different, and that's actually probably a pretty crucial difference. But this client had a workplace injury. It was a fall downstairs, and they jarred their back. Okay, they had no necessarily previous MRIs and imaging, but they'd had previous back pain. And this back pain mirrored what they had before. So they didn't know what to do, and they were hurt at work. Okay, and there's a lot of fear that can happen around that. And not to say that the fear was the reason that this makes it their fault. It's not their fault. Right? It's normal to have this fear. But here's what happened. So they get hurt, they go off. They're worried about the pain. They're scared about the pain, right? Makes total sense because they don't understand what's going on. They go to the doctor. Doctor says, "Oh, you must have done something. Let's order some tests." Gets an x-ray, gets an MRI. In this case, it was an MRI. What did they find? They found a disc bulge. They found a significant herniation. Now, this herniation wasn't necessarily in terms of like what we call sequestration, which is actually where the material of the disc has like broken out and all of that. If you're curious about what all of that kind of means, it's just basically severity of that. But you can reach out and let me know. But what happened was the framing of that was you herniated a disc. And this fall created this structural problem, and that is the cause of your pain. And you're not going to get better until this disc gets better. And how you get this disc better is by being off of work, worrying about when you get pain and symptoms, and trying to avoid it. And that is the cycle that creates chronic pain and chronic symptoms. Some people can recover fairly quickly from something like that if they approach it with the way of looking at things where maybe they're going to go and progressively exercise and they'll feel okay with that and they understand their body's going to heal. But for some, that's almost like a death sentence. It's almost like I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to work again because this pain is so bad. Now, remember, I'm going to go back to something I said before. Pain does not indicate tissue damage. There is very, very little correlation between pain and degree of damage. We also don't know if that herniation happened at that moment or previous. It could have already been there. So this is the same type of thing. I look at this as this is almost the exact same mechanism, exact same situation as what I did when I fell down my stairs. The difference being is I knew enough not to do what Howard Schubiner calls the 7 Fs. So Howard Schubiner is a physician that has done so much work. He's an amazing mentor. I've taken a few different courses from him, and he's absolutely incredible. He's just put out a book called Unlearn Your Pain, released in May of 2026. And in there, he talks about the 7 F words that basically are things that are the common traps that make pain and symptoms worse and keep people stuck. Fear, focus, frustration, fighting, figuring out, fixing, and being forlorn. So what the difference is if you are fearing the pain or if you're focusing on it to try and figure it out or get rid of it, and you're frustrated and you're fighting through it, you're doing everything you can to fix it. These are the things that turn the alarm bell up. These are the things that make it that symptoms will actually kick around and stay. Okay? Now, I want to be 100% clear here because it could be interpreted, what I'm saying is that there's some blame here. I do not blame the client. I do not blame the doctors. I do not blame the medical system. Okay, I lied. I blame the medical system. But we don't know any better. The medical system is what it is, and it does need to evolve. But it's basically everybody's doing their best to try and help. The challenge is understanding the new neuroscience that pain doesn't equal tissue damage. Pain correlates with fear more than tissue damage in almost every case. Okay? So the meaning of the pain, the meaning of the imaging is what matters the most. The injury and that whole system communicated to the person that there was something that happened. The brain heard that as danger and responded accordingly. That's not weakness. That is not that this person has done something wrong. The nervous system itself was doing what it was taught to do. Okay? So, 2 stories, similar history. One of them, me, goes down the stairs, lands hard. I kind of look at it and go, yeah, I'm going to move through it because it's not that bad. The other hits a flare-up and it takes over their life for months. Okay, the tissue is not what's different. What's different is the belief behind what's happening. And what we do in the first hour and the first day matters when we're talking about something flaring up. Again, this is not about mental strength or willpower. Absolutely not. My client wasn't weaker than me, really. They were taught to be afraid of the system that they went through. The diagnosis, the imaging, the injury claim process, all of it communicated something is seriously wrong with your body. So be careful and protect it. And that is a helpful message, but also a harmful message. So when the brain gets that message and it gets it enough times, it learns and it generates symptoms to match the degree of fear and challenge that's having. And that's neuroplasticity working against you instead of for you. The brain's doing its job. The nervous system's doing its job. It's just working from the wrong information. So changing that pattern does take time. And for me, it took really diving in and learning all of this work, learning about my own physiology, how symptoms actually work, and knowing what that actually is and how to look at it. But most people don't have that problem. So this is what I'm going to do for the remaining part of this episode. I'm going to tell you what to do when you get symptoms. I'm going to give you a framework of how to approach this. A lot of this comes back to much of the learning that I've done, and I'm going to credit Nicole Sachs here. She's a social worker, a clinical social worker in the States. She runs the podcast, The Cure for Chronic Pain. Amazing, really incredible work, incredible perspective on things, and I've learned a lot from listening to her and her work. One of the things she says, okay, when a symptom shows up, the first question to ask is, am I going to die? Right? Because really, literally, this is what our nervous system and our brains are trying to prevent us from dying. It's trying to keep us alive. And so when the symptom shows up, we have to look at it like, okay, is there something seriously wrong? Like, is my arm falling out of its socket? Is it flopping around? Am I bleeding? Is there something here that's going to cause me to die? Or have a significant something close to that? Is it going to kill me? And if no, then that can create a small crack in that panic, in that response, that initial reaction of the body and the nervous system. The nervous system doesn't make that distinction right away. It's like, boom, here's the alarm. Now we have the ability to interpret that. And so what we can do is we can take stock. We can go, okay, all right, it hurts to move, but actually I'm not too bad. Yeah, I definitely have some pain, but I'm moving around. I didn't do any real new significant damage. That's the first step, and that can be really hard and very, very scary. But it's important that we give our nervous system that information. Okay, I think I'm going to be okay. All right, yeah, it hurts, but I think I'm going to be okay. And this isn't about fighting and pushing through. This is about legitimately saying to your nervous system, okay, all right, yeah, I jarred myself. I think things are actually not too bad. Okay, so that's step number one. And I want to bring an analogy in here as well as we sort of start talking about this. This is something, I come back to this a lot. This is a story about how to meet individuals and symptoms and that with empathy and how to approach when you're looking at the nervous system, how to approach what to do and how to approach these symptoms. Okay, so most everybody's seen the movie Inside Out. It's a cartoon. It's an amazing movie about emotions, and the emotions are living inside this person Riley, and there's associated with all sorts of memories and all this. And so anyway, there is this part in that Inside Out movie where the emotion joy, personified, of course, and sadness, also personified as different characters. They're sort of the main characters of the movie, and they go through different memories to try and get to this train station to get back to the central hub or the brain and the nervous system and that. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, go see it and you'll know what I'm talking about. But there's this character who's a memory of the main girl who these emotions live in, and his name is Bing Bong. Bing Bong lost one of his favorite connections to Riley, the main human that they're working with and living inside, and he was devastated. Now, Joy, of course, being okay, let's get going, she tries everything to fix the grief that Bing Bong has, but nothing works. She goes through the whole process of looking at, let's fix it, let's distract, let's let's do things to change, to get you better, to make it so that this goes away. And it doesn't work. But then sadness comes along and sits with him and says, I'm here. What you're going through, that sucks. That's what actually helps in this situation, saying, oh, okay, it hurts. But I'm going to actually sit with it and go, all right, it hurts, but I'm actually not going to be that bad. It's going to be okay. And you sit with the symptom, and that's what actually helps. Most people try and treat these symptoms like Joy treated Bing Bong. Let's fix it. Let's fix and fix the change, or fix the symptom, fix the injury, fix the problem. And that is what actually confirms to the nervous system that there is something to fear. Acknowledging that there's something going on without the alarm is basically the most useful thing that you can do with symptoms that have some degree of neuroplasticity approaching them. Okay, so what does sitting actually look like? This isn't the white knuckling. This isn't the, oh my God, what is going on? It's notice the symptom, acknowledge it without reacting, and say, okay, it's here. It's uncomfortable, but it's not going to destroy me. This is where we stop Googling, stop repositioning, stop checking if it's worse, stop trying to fix it and stretch it away. And then we go back to avoiding some of these symptom traps that Dr. Schubiner talked about, the 7 F words. So let's go back to the staircase and say what's actually going to happen. And I'm going to do a step-by-step what to do. Okay? So this is a live example of the whole framework in action. So first thing, ask the question, the Nicole Sachs question, am I going to die? No? All right, good. Let's move on. Do an inventory without catastrophizing. So notice what hurts, check what moves, and look at facts, not the emotions that are associated with them. If the emotions come up, it's important to think about them and notice them. But what you want to look at is okay, what actually is happening? Well, yeah, it hurts, but I can actually do that. So then you ask the question, do you need to go seek help? Do you need to go and seek medical care? Maybe that's a yes, maybe that's a no. You'll know in the time. But if you feel like you're pushing through, then definitely go check it out. But when the tests come back, you're going to find that there is imaging. You're going to find that you've done the x-rays, you've done the MRIs, you've done all the stuff. And maybe there's a history there. Maybe there's a history of injury. There's a history of having all these problems. But we don't pull those into the moment. We don't feed the story that is necessarily the reason for our pain. Okay? Get clearance. Get okay, well, yeah, there's some stuff that needs to be worked with. But we don't feed the fear. So we acknowledge symptoms without alarm. This is here, it's uncomfortable, and it's not going to destroy me. Okay? That is one of the main differences that happens with what happened with me down the staircase and my client who went down the staircase as well, is the alarm was turned up in his situation for all of the reasons that we talked about, and the alarm for me was able to be turned down. Similar story, completely different. We acknowledge, and then we don't fix and we don't fight. The immediate stretching and repositioning and Googling and trying to figure everything out, we avoid doing that. And we try and move on with our lives and say, okay, it's all right. Turn the alarm bell down. That is such a crucial part of this. If the alarm doesn't turn down, again, if the pain is staying up, then absolutely go and get it checked out. Make sure that we're dealing with something that's worth dealing with and not trying to push through. Then finally, what we do is we let it settle. We give the nervous system time not only to facilitate any healing that needs to happen, but also to almost soothe as you're sitting with a symptom like sadness soothed with Bing Bong. Okay, so this is the third option of what to do. Not freaking out, not trying to push through, not trying to fix it, but letting it be and just going through life and moving and all of those things when you're able to, okay? That's not toughness. That strong in body, strong in mind doesn't mean pushing through. It's about really understanding what the symptoms are meaning and finding the meaning in what the nervous system is trying to tell you in that moment. In that moment, for me, the nervous system was saying, you're a fucking idiot. You fell down the damn stairs, right? But we had a laugh. We figured it out. Okay, yep. And I went through 2 or 3 days with some pain. And I followed the process, and I'm here today, and I will say that, yeah, I don't feel any pain 6 days later, okay? Maybe I was lucky. Maybe I didn't hurt something. And you know what? Let's face it, I was lucky. But at the same time, I think the story behind all of that is such a crucial part that people forget and that people really don't know.
Okay, it's a skill to learn this. It really is. And it does take time. And it's not just about understanding it, it's about teaching your nervous system how to do this. And that honestly is the work that we do. So, all right, there we are, nerds. If this rang true for you or you got something from this, I would really appreciate a comment or a share and a like and a subscribe, all of that kind of thing. I really hope that this helps you deal with symptoms. And remember, it's not a bad thing to get it checked out. It's actually a good thing to go get it checked out. Just remember that the story that's created around that can define the next few months or even years of what you're going to deal with, because we know that chronic symptoms don't need to stick around. Okay, there we are, nerds. Have an awesome day and see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Mind Body Strength Nerds podcast. I know you found some value in your time here, so please like, comment, and subscribe to help me spread the word about the power of neuroplasticity.